Hello, my name is Gabriel Upson, and this is my presentation on differentiated instruction in the classroom. So the first thing we have is bilingual, or maybe kids who don't have English as a first language, and multicultural kids in the classroom. So focusing on bilingual, so you can say, make sure words are slowly pronounced and enunciated. You can have things highlighted around the room, like whiteboard, maybe a illustration of what you're presenting in class. You can have the word underneath it, so that way they have a visual aid. Um, you need to make sure that they're absorbing all the info. So you don't want to just keep throwing stuff at them, when they're obviously very confused. They let them process it and work things out on their own. A good thing would be maybe take notes home, so that way they can read them. Maybe put them in a translator if they have to figure out what's going on. You could translate some homework assignments for them. And then there's plenty of translator apps out there that allow you to say stuff and then they can be translated for them. You can also have a translator in the class. Visual aids are really good though, because it lets them see the word and then hear you say it, and then they can make a connection and help them put the two together. And then you have multicultural. Sometimes these kids might need to miss class to make sure that you have all the stuff needed for them. Sometimes they might need extra help because they are from a different background, so they might not be able to explain things that you compare, or maybe some things that the class has said. They might also have trouble with friends, so this means don't let kids choose their own groups, because then they can get left out. Kind of a forced group situation, so that way people are communicating with others and understanding of everybody. Another good thing would be communication. Just make sure the parents let you know when they're going to miss class, what's going on, why they can't show up, things like that. Maybe even a way to contact them, so if their kid does miss class, you can give them plenty of things that they need, stuff that you're doing in class, homework, or notes that they missed. But the thing is, you want to let them practice as much of their culture as you can. Obviously, there's going to be some difficulties in some areas, but for the most part, I'm pretty sure it's very easy to let them practice their own culture. So the next thing we went on to is learning disorders. Now this is where it does get a bit more specific. Like if they have a reading disorder, then you can have auditory notes, multiple ways to take tests. Maybe have someone sit there and read it to them. When it comes to math, science, and English, like I'm going to be teaching science, so the universal design, I would maybe sit down and give them plenty of other examples. Maybe more visual aids, maybe more auditory ways to compare the two, instead of just what I'm giving to the regular class. Um, uh, Tests, though, yeah, like I said, they can be taken with help, or there's other forms. Maybe they take it in parts, so they have a reading part that gets read, and they just have to fill out like a Scantron thing. Uh, but with learning disorders, it just kind of depends on what the disorder is, because there's so many, dysgraphia, dyslexia, things like that. So, but yeah, if it's more of a reading or content based one, then you're going to have that kind of area where you just need to focus on that student a little more than you would with the other students. So communication disorders, class projects can be dealt with, differently. Like maybe a kid who has a severe stutter, he can present, but he doesn't have maybe a time limit because it'd be harder for him to present. Um, Things like using visuals when possible, because maybe sometimes they can't understand our language as well. There's just a broad spectrum of communication, because it's more of them not being able to speak, or maybe them not being able to understand. So maybe you have to hand out written notes, so that way they can read it later over and over again to make sure they understand it. Or maybe they need auditory notes to process it, because maybe they can't read it and understand it. You can also make a video of the class to be watched at a later date. This could also have subtitles if they want to. Like I said, with all the visuals there, you can give them maybe visuals to take home, so that way they understand it. Handwritten notes would be a good one too, because a lot of them, sometimes it's more of a hearing thing than anything. So emotional and behavioral disorders. So these are kids that kind of act out. They could be aggression. These are more like things that we can't explain. So like eating disorders and stuff like that, anxiety disorders, bipolar. So one, set rules so that way everybody understands. You can't hit kids, you can't touch kids. Maybe respect others. the way you want to be treated would be a good way to explain things instead of um, keep your hands to yourself, because then they could think, oh, maybe I can kick this kid. If they are dealing with anxiety places, at least designate a safe space so that way they know um, they have somewhere to sit down and process everything that's going on. A visual schedule, like on the board of what's happening for the day, and then maybe even handing them one for the week. That way they know what's going on, and if something changes, you'll need to let them know ahead of time, because sudden changes kind of seems to set them off. So students with ADHD, so this is another case by case thing. Some kids, they have hyper focus, they're focusing on everything. Some kids um, can't focus at all. Some kids, they need to jump around. Some kids have some combination of all of them. So there's just many different things. One thing is different seating options, so they could sit on like a electric exercise ball, so that way they can move around and keep some fluidity within them. Maybe walk around if they need to. Some kids are just, they're getting so hyper focused that it's hard for them, so they maybe need to take a break or get a drink of water and come back. This is another good case of written notes or auditory notes for them to take home and redo, because maybe they weren't able to focus that day in class. You want to keep distractions, limited in the classroom, so it's easier for them to focus and keep them on track. Tests, it's another thing. Make sure they're not cheating or anything, but you can let them have breaks. Maybe take them with someone else, so that way they keep them on track. Things like that. So students with intellectual disabilities and those on the autism spectrum, you want to give them small tasks, so that way they can take it piece by piece, and it's not this big huge ordeal right in front of them. Some more hands-on tasks are a little bit better. They seem to learn a little more. Another good thing with visual aids. And then another thing is you want to give them constant feedback. Hey, you did a good job on this small task. Hey, you did really good. Hey, you're missing a little bit here, so that way they understand and they can process what's going on, what's right and what's wrong. Traumatic brain injury, this is another case by case thing. Some kids have it really hard. Some kids, maybe they're not as affected. So you want to have notes ready for them, because when it deals with the brain, they're going to get really sleepy and they'll have to sleep a lot, kind of thing. So, if they need to leave and go take a nap because, it's just their time of day to go take a nap, then you need to let them. Tests and things like that may be taken in parts. Sometimes they might have to take it a week later because they have to catch up on all the notes they have. And then they might have to take it in 3 different parts because, it's really hard on them, and, they might be affected in different ways. But this is another one of those that until you're in that situation, you really don't know what the student is affected. He might have a minor traumatic brain injury, so he might get like headaches that he might have to leave for, or you might have to turn off the lights or allow him to go into a dark spot. This is another safe space kind of thing. Allow him to leave and come back if he has to. But just know that they can do what they need to if they need to leave and stuff like that. So for those with hearing impairments, you can have speakers for those that can't hear as much. So speakers around the room will allow them to hear, things that you say. You might have a mic on you. There's plenty of apps out there that actually write what you say. So like, Siri can even do it, but there's apps that catch just about everything. And you can even have a mic on you, like I said, that writes it down and sends it right to the student that needs it. You can have written notes of what's going over, so that way they can go over it later and if they missed anything. You can have a video of the lecture with subtitles later on, if they need it that way. A translator is a good one for those who are completely deaf and maybe use sign language. Speaking clearly, now this one helps kids that can't hear as well, but it also allows those that can read lips and things like that to process what you're saying. And then seating is another important one. If some kids are maybe they don't like loud noises, they can probably sit farther back. If they can't hear very much, they can sit closer forward. It's all kind of varied case by case, but just allowing them to be able to sit where they need to the best, and using these would really help them out. So with visual impairments, a good thing would be like auditory notes, maybe notes in Braille if you need to. Allow them to have a projection of the board. Maybe they can't see as well, so allowing to have it on their desk, or even like the slideshow just on their desk. This is another seating kind of thing. You can have them up close if they need to see it. Um, but there's plenty of ways to do it. Maybe a person will sit next to them and explain what's going on the board as well. So with the gifted, there's these are kids who are a little more advanced than the rest of the kids in the class, but you don't want to leave them behind. So a good thing that you can do is compact curriculum. So if they do know some area, you can move past it and move on to the next one and give them more detailed stuff. If you're doing stuff in class and they've already got it done, allow them to move on, have extra homework for them maybe, or homework that's due later in the week. Extra material is always good. Maybe things for them to read up on but don't have to do, because kids kind of get discouraged if they are constantly getting more material just because they're doing it faster than the other kids because they understand it more. Maybe you have to go with a more detailed approach. Like instead of cell parts, you have to do cell parts and functions for a student. Um, that way, it's they understand more and they have to absorb more. They might need to be put in a separate group. Now, this is kind of frowned upon, but if you have a bunch of gifted students, it helps them all learn together instead of individually. But the biggest thing is just to make sure they are being challenged and not just kind of bored sitting in the back. So if you have more than one, um, these few things kind of help it all together. So visual aids, notes that can be given out, speaking clearly and enunciating, being louder or quiet if they need it. Making sure there's available safe spaces and apps. There's plenty of apps out there that help students with whatever disability they may be handling. Just making sure you're finding the right one and making sure it's the proper one to use. But I'd say the biggest one though is these visual aids, because students always seem to absorb better as long as they can compare it to something else.